This is the nature of what will go viral, and you're probably on the platform because you want to yell at something. But I also think it's what happens in every major market cycle, right? Like every time there's a market shift, a bunch of people will show up and say, oh my God, this is going to change the world tomorrow and our lives are going to be different. And that's the best thing ever. Another group of people show up and say, oh my God, this is going to change the world tomorrow and our lives are going to be absolutely disastrous. And rarely is it either of those things.
Hi, my name is Dimitri Panici, and I'm a content creator, agency owner, and AI enthusiast. You're listening to the AI Agents Podcast, brought to you by Jotform, and featuring our very own CEO and founder, Ida Tank. This is the show where artificial intelligence meets innovation, productivity, and the tools shaping the future of work. Enjoy the show. Hello, and welcome back to another episode of the AI Agents Podcast. Here we have the CEO and founder of PolarGrid, Rade Kovacevic. How are you doing today, Rade?
I'm doing well, and way to go on the name.
I did it. I was like, literally, I was doing that Kovacevic before we pressed record, guys. So just give me a like, subscribe, and review on the Apple podcast so that they're like, wow, this guy can pronounce words. No, but in all seriousness, Rade, really excited to have you on the show. Tell us a little bit about who you are and how you got into AI in the first place.
Yeah, totally. So I've been a entrepreneur and founder my whole life. I likely am also unemployable is why. I started my first company when I was 12 years old, way back in the 90s, building websites and e-commerce when that was like the brand new thing that no one knew about. Worked with some buddies in the 2010s in a different space, and we took a company from a slide deck, and then we built it to over a $20 billion valuation on the NYSE in under 5 years. And then now building out PolarGrid, and super pumped to be working in the AI space.
Yeah, absolutely. What are you most excited about with what you're doing right now? Tell us a little bit about PolarGrid in general, and then tell us first and foremost, like, what are you stoked about right now?
Yeah, like I think what gets me most excited is when there's massive market shifts. It's where I've always worked across different categories, and there is no doubt that AI represents that on a global basis. And it's super fun because you get to see everything in the world get disrupted in different ways. And so there's really no industry that's safe, that's able to remain stagnant through this market shift. You get to see it in what it means for my own kids and their schooling. You get to see it in what your friends work and how it's impacted. And for us, we get to build at the space. And I just think when you have massive movement on the technology front, in looking back to like how the 90s and 2000s played out, it's one of those things where we all think about what the impact will be 5-10 years down the road. But we gotta live through those years to find out what we got right, what we got wrong, and what takes less time or more time than we expected.
Yeah, absolutely. What are you right now? I know that you kind of are, if I'm not wrong, the goal of your company, I see the tagline on the website, is real-time AI interface at the edge. Now, I'll be honest, there's a bit of buzzwords there. So I would love to hear just one other thing that, I mean, obviously under that, it says that you're cutting network latency by 70% per request. What is the kind of issue that's happening right now with latency, and what prompted you to think that AI was going to be a good solution for this?
Yeah, so let me take a step back and maybe tell you how we got into this space. So we're reading about a year and a half ago a bunch of books that were written in the late 90s. So really looking for analogs with the dot-com boom, things that rhyme that would apply today. If I take you back to my first company building websites when I was 12 years old, we're putting images on the internet, and people are super pumped because now you don't have to send an image through the mail. You can see it on the internet and share it with others, and it takes only 30 seconds to load, and that feels like real-time magic. And then I'm dating myself here, but you go back to like 1997, and we have this thing called Adobe Flash, and it's animated introductions to websites with animated pictures moving. Again, it feels real time. It takes only 30 seconds to load. And then Napster comes along, if you remember those days, and we're able to download single songs in only 12 minutes on dial-up modems. And absolutely amazing because we don't have to go to the mall anymore. And in all three of these cases, we were enamored with them at the time. But if you look at them now, any of the service providers take single digit milliseconds from a latency perspective. And if it took a second, you would bounce from the application or the page in a heartbeat. And so we looked at that and said, that feels like it rhymes with what's happening with AI. And so the thesis we came up with is when you have large market shifts, we all get enamored with all these new features and capabilities. And rightly so. It's super cool, all the things you can do. But it often takes the market a couple of years to realize that it needs to focus on user expectations. And then as user adoption increases, user expectations continue to grow. And as competition comes into play, product managers start worrying about user experience. And so, how we got thinking about the idea of building edge network to drive real-time AI is we said, what happened in the late 90s and what is happening now, and where's that confluence across them? And so if you go back to 1997, there's a company called Akamai who's still around and doing great things today. And they basically figure out that if they put servers at the edge, so the availability zone level, or a simpler way of putting it is like in every city, then what they can do is they can cache static data and they can make things load faster. At the same time, people figure out how they can optimize image files to go with the image example. And when you put those two together, all of a sudden, images went from taking 30 seconds to render on the internet to being instantaneous. And so the analog to today is we have our chat GPT moment. Now there's all sorts of models being used across products in AI. And a lot of the focus has been how do we improve the chipsets to make things run faster? Then how do we improve the models? And how do we optimize those models? And as that's happened, it's sped up the end to end latency. But the gap that's remained is on the networking infrastructure. And so we still have this issue where we can't load stuff quick enough to make it in actual real time. And so that's where we've zeroed in. And I can explain to you a bit more why that latency exists and what's different from all the work we did across the original internet and the mobile and streaming over the last 30 years and why that was essentially undone as AI came on board.
Yeah, please do that. Yep, that'd be great.
So if you go back to the ChatGPT moment, you all of a sudden have this mass public interest in really technology that had been, created over the decade or 15 years prior. And you suddenly have end consumer and business demand coming for inference. And as that demand comes on, what the hyperscalers rightly do is they say, oh my God, we need to supply this demand. And as a result, they start putting more GPU servers where they already have them, which is in their centralized hyperscale facilities. And they rapidly scale those to respond to demand. As we've all seen in the news, that demand has not stopped. And so they've continued to build out centralized infrastructure to further scale out the supply. The problem with that is we now have the end user requests going directly from the user to the centralized service provider. And so the impact of that is we've undone basically 30 years of networking infrastructure. And so as a result, the network latency is 3 to 10 times longer than the traditional internet. And so where we end up living is we're living back in 1995 from an architecture perspective, and we need to actually recreate the networking foundational layer to enable faster networking round trip time, which enables real-time AI inference calls.
Interesting. And where do you think is kind of what do you think the reason that this hasn't necessarily been sold at a mass scale is yet? And why you think like you were one of the people that kind of figure this out?
Yeah, so I think it goes back to sort of what I was saying about looking at the internet and where it was in 95 versus 97 and 99. And so it naturally makes sense as you have outsized demand that you would continue to build up supply to meet that. And I think as we see with many companies, whether it's the neo clouds or the hyperscalers, they're doing incredibly well financially and have made the decision to respond to that batch processing. But at the same time, it's the user expectation that needs to continue to increase. And what we're seeing is a hyper speed of change with AI. It's really only been what, like 3.5 years since the chat GPT moment. And as a result, the time for user adoption has lagged from when it was first known in the tech community. Then user expectations on top of that, particularly as newer and newer models continue to come out with higher quality. And so we're finally at that stage where user adoption is mature enough to expect faster response times. And that's what's just now starting to put pressure on this sort of real-time enablement piece. If you then think of what is happening in real time. There's a few different examples. So if you think of deep research, it's super cool that I can do deep research, and it's gone from taking 12 minutes to maybe a handful of minutes. And I don't have to hire McKinsey at a company anymore to be able to, do a whole bunch of analytical work. Network latency doesn't matter for that because network latency really removes only about half a second of time. So what you need is end-to-end use cases where the latency is 1 second and the user interaction needs to be synchronous. And so think of an example like voice AI. So when you're working with a voice agent, you expect it to be conversational. We have to have a free flow of dialogue. If you were a voice agent, I'd expect you to be able to respond quickly to me, right? The problem right now is within voice, it takes around 700 milliseconds as best practice to get a response. And I think the best comparison is if we jump on this call and either of us have a laggy connection, we're inherently going to interrupt each other, right? It's no good. Like, even though you could have a conversation, it's just no fun and you want to get off, right? And so that's where voice agents are at now. The reasoning is really great. The voice cloning is really great, but you have that interruption loop that breaks the conversation. And so what we know from the years of research from companies like Zoom and Meets and Teams is you have to get from that 700 milliseconds down to 300 milliseconds to have user satisfaction with the flow of a conversation. And so that's the type of use case where network latency really matters because the network latency itself becomes the bottleneck and it has to be solved for. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I'm thinking about it again based on what you just said, and I'm the difference between 300 and 700 latency, and it's milliseconds, is not that much, but I mean, it's if I'm not wrong, 100 milliseconds would be zero point 0.1 second, right? So we have, yeah, I guess it's like like half a second ish that you're trying to shave off, like a little under half a second that you're trying to shave off, and that's a big deal. If I were to go to you and even just a normal conversation, every time it looked like I had to think. Like, when I was talking, it's like an awkward conversation anytime that happens, right? Where you're like, without the person even going, like, if they just go, like, it's just so,
You nail it.
like,
It doesn't feel like they're engaged with you, right? Like
or it feels like they're
it
mad,
feels like they're
honestly,
paying attention to
sometimes.
something else or something's going
Yeah.
on.
Yeah. So
No,
I mean,
you nailed it. And
yeah,
like you think of it from a trust factor, it's one thing if you and I have that and I say, geez, is Dimitri like reading something else off screen or he's working on his second job? But
yeah,
when you know
exactly.
you're talking to a voice agent, it completely
It's
breaks the trust that this is a
ridiculous.
real interaction.
Yeah. And I was thinking about it because I remember when I first I had my girlfriend's dad was introduced to our agents, or actually a different product, but our agents as well. He was like, "Yeah, this is really good for like phone call stuff, but like I gotta wait. The wait time's weird." And I was like, "Yeah, it's just where the tech's at right now." It's kind of what the response I was like, "You can't really like, I can't help you because the reasoning's there, etc." He's like, "Yeah, I'd be fine, but it just doesn't feel like I'm talking to somebody," which is that's fair and yeah, it's just I think this is good. What applications? Excuse me. What applications do you feel like mainly this will apply to the quickest?
Yeah, so I think the way to think about it is where is there a law of competition in the marketplace, and where is there a lot of value to be lost if you end up having drop calls. And so within the voice space, there's sort of two obvious places. One, because they are doing really well with voice agents, which drives more competition. And two, they're doing well because there's lots of ROI. And so in that case, where I'd really look at is customer support and talent recruitment. And so in both cases, there's clear problems if you don't have consistent interaction with your users. So think of customer support. I have someone calling in and I'm choosing to provide my customers with voice agents because now there's no wait time. We can have better quality answers because they have encyclopedic knowledge. We can make sure that they can respond in the language that our customers want and various other positive attributes. If that voice agent doesn't respond effectively to build trust with that end customer and have a productive conversation, both in terms of the information they provide as well as the quality of the back and forth of the conversation, and I lose that customer, there is a clear lifetime value to having annoyed that customer if I lose them. It's just a very clear math question. And what you would have to believe is if you didn't care about latency, you would be saying, I'm okay if it's a good enough it's good enough. It doesn't have to be a great user experience. And having run large customer experience businesses before, I don't know any product manager that would say that's an acceptable answer, right? You always want your customers to be not just satisfied, like ideally you have a fantastic um, response from them and they think your brand is great and they love interacting with you. And so the same on the voice agent side when you're using it, it shouldn't just be equal to a dissatisfied interaction with a typical call center. It should be, this has been absolutely fantastic on all parts, and you should be constantly working to make it better. The other area you can see it is talent recruitment. So, voice agents are being used more and more for round one job interviews. And part of it is it helps create equal output and it helps move more people through the funnel so you can find better talent. If you have a great potential employee that drops because they get frustrated with your voice agent, that has a material impact on your business. And you would not use voice agents if you saw that in the future. So ensuring that you have the best quality interaction on the voice, on the reasoning, and on the latency side is absolutely essential to products of that nature. And again, the value of losing a great employee is something that can be quantified from an HR perspective. And so that's why I think those two are the places where one, we're seeing voice agents really take off as a category, and two, where they have that hair on fire moment where they truly want to address latency to make excellent products, not just acceptable products.
Yeah, fair. And I think, yeah, I think for me, the immediate thoughts that I have that are probably the most concerning with the implementation of these agents without good MS. When I say MS, instead of like milliseconds, I feel like I'm talking gaming terms. Um, and tell a gamer how much 100 MS is, they'll tell you. But no, the truth of the matter is, I think customer support for industries where maybe there could be more elderly callers. I think even something as simple as like ordering food. Like I feel like there's some places that like there's ideas that I've heard where people are like, oh, we could have like pizza places, like they pick up the phone, you order and that kind of stuff. I'm like, that's cool and all, but I can imagine it being pretty weird to call a place and then you're saying it and then you get so irritated. You're like, I could have just input it on my phone faster. Um, I think there are some other examples out there like HR agents and sales reps that are probably miserable to talk to at the moment in comparison to where it could be at.
Yeah, and I think to your point, like you can then start seeing where this will go and more broadly. Again, you can use analogs from the days old of the internet, but like you start with voice agents. I would expect in 2 years we're seeing video agents, right? So I can have an outbound sales rep, but instead of it just being email, I can have an avatar of myself reach out to potential customers, talk in the same dialectic I would talk in, and provide that feedback. But it has the added value of trust and resonance of seeing my avatar as opposed to simply it being text based or voice based, right? As that comes on, those models will have needed to improve, the chipsets will have improved. But again, you will need to address the network latency to ensure that you can actually have a real time experience that you can go back and forth with and have a conversation, same as voice. And then I think to take a step further, once you have voice and you have video, it actually goes to your joke about the gaming side of naturally it will go into gaming. So the way I like to think about it is like I have a 12-year-old son. He loves to play Fortnite and he always complains he's playing bots. It would be fantastic if one day the bots were good enough that he did not know was a bot and he thought was another person playing in the video game. And so you
Is
can
he
see
actually
a
playing
bunch
bots?
of
I don't know if is
applications.
that a real problem?
It is a real problem. Yes.
It's just these dudes. Come on. Sorry. Continue.
But no, but like in all seriousness, to your point, in gaming, latency is very well known as a problem. Like it's a critical path thing to ensure you have a high quality gaming experience. And it's a significantly large industry. And so you're seeing the same thing from the 90s and 2000s replay itself, where you start with one market that moves to real time, in this case being voice is the fastest there with AI. But you're going to start seeing other models improve in their end-to-end latency, which is going to enable them to get just close enough to be almost good enough for real-time use cases. That's going to unlock a whole number of new business opportunities and consumer benefits that don't exist today. And I think that's really where you see the market going over the next 5 years quite quickly.
Hmm. What do you think is your favorite part about what you do right now?
I think what's most fun about is how much everything is changing so quick. I'm not a person that likes stable footing in work, is maybe the way I put it. And so there's
The business
constantly
owner doesn't
something
like
new
stability. Who would
happening.
have thought? Sorry.
Yeah. Yeah. But, like, in this market, it's one, going such a rapid pace, and then two, it's so constantly changing, and so those two create new opportunities all the time, right? And so it plays to folks that like that roller coaster ride, that see that as a tailwind instead of a headwind, and see it as presenting a whole bunch of opportunities that you're able to drive into, as opposed to, "Oh god, why can't I do the thing I used to do yesterday?" And I think, like, this is my 4th venture now, that I've built, and for me, that's what makes it fun. Like, I wouldn't be working in this category, and I wouldn't be working in a startup if I wanted a 9 to 5 boring job. I would be working in a cereal company producing Cheerios for the 100th year in a row, sort of thing. It
You
just doesn't
could.
have the,
It's
the
on
the
the
same
table.
fun. You could, yeah. You've all seen the Simpsons episode with the box factory. I could be working inside box factory. It could be a glorious life, but it is not the life for me. So yeah.
That's cool. No, what do you think is most interesting recently in AI in general? I think, you know, you are the more, if I'm not wrong, the more technical founder, right? So, what are your thoughts on the recent advancements in things like Claude Code and otherwise?
Yeah, so I think the coding stuff is super cool, but it's more like, I almost view it as just productivity. It's almost like machinery for coding, right? Like it produces more and more output, but it doesn't feel revolutionary from like a how do we think about the world. Um, I would say like the Clawbot stuff from a couple of weeks ago, or whatever we're supposed to call Clawbot now, is super neat
It's
in
called
terms of
Open
seeing.
Claw, sir. It's called Open
There we go,
Claw.
Open Claw now, and
Sorry,
in
I'm
between
sorry
that
you
we have
couldn't get it
Molt
right. I'm
Book as
sorry you
well.
didn't know the third name in 12 days.
Yeah,
Come on now.
following all the cease and desist letters. But yeah, like I think that sort of stuff is super neat because when I think of where this all goes from an agentic perspective, it's like it's one thing to take what are my inputs and how can I increase outputs from a coding perspective. It's another thing to think of what are my inputs and how can I get more activities done than I would have been able to do otherwise across a wide variety of use cases. And so it's been neat seeing the excitement about open claw as it's driven forward, all the security issues it has created that people have quickly tried to figure out how to solve for, what that means in terms of where people are using it, whether it's in work in their life and where they cannot use it, and how quickly the world and the tech community gets focused on like this one idea in a 2 week period. And interestingly, I would expect in 3 weeks we'll have moved on to the next thing. And it's a very interesting hurricane that we're living in that regard in terms of trying to understand where that value will be provided 2 years from now versus what's the thing of the moment. And I think it's a cool use case that you could people argue in both directions, and only time will tell us who's right.
You called it a hurricane just now. Interesting choice of words. I do agree. Would you say that it's interesting because I feel like hurricane has a destructive element to it, but I don't quite think it's destructive. Would you say whirlwind? Maybe, but well, whirlwind's kind of a
Maybe whirlwind's better, although I'm sure we're
yeah.
just not
I
don't know
guess
what
it's
a
also
real whirlwind
destructive. I
is.
feel like there's no good word to
Uh,
describe it. Like, because sometimes it feels like low grade hysteria, like some of the like freakouts about stuff. I don't know about you, but there's a uh, there's something that really this grinds my gears. When you essentially have a situation occur like the lovable and the vibe coding uh, craze, right? And you basically are working with these people who are obsessed with stating things that are technically inaccurate on LinkedIn in order to get uh, posted impressions. And as somebody who works in the space building something, what are your thoughts on that? Because this, to me, is one of my biggest pet peeves. I can't stand it. Thoughts?
yeah, I get less agitated about it. I think it's more like one, we all know how clickbait works, and so this is the nature of if you're choosing to go live your life on X or LinkedIn these days as well, like this is the nature of what will go viral, and
Fair
you're
enough.
probably on the platform because you want to yell at something. But I also think it's what happens in every major market cycle, right? Like every time there's a market shift, a bunch of people will show up and say, "Oh my God, this is going to change the world tomorrow, and our lives are going to be different, and that's the best thing ever." Another group of people show up and say, "Oh my God, this is going to change the world tomorrow, and our lives are going to be absolutely disastrous." And rarely is it either of those things, right? And so you can look at like early industrialization, and the ability to use machines to do basic labor. And, the Luddites were really concerned about that and what that would mean in terms of human empowerment. And other people thought we would have magical things right away, and took hundreds of years to get to where we are today. And then you can look at the same at the internet of, oh my God, there won't be any retail stores tomorrow. And people were, prophesizing that back in 1996 as e-commerce started to be known. A ton of businesses were built around it, and the vast majority of them failed, right? Amazon took quite a while before it started to take off. And lo and behold, there are still retail businesses today, 30 years later. And so I think the same with AI. It's super exciting for people to talk about how, none of us will need jobs in 5 years, and life will be, incredibly different and full of prosperity. That is seems highly unlikely when you look at the development of human society, or even just the implementation of AI across the world right now. Equally, it seems highly unlikely that AI is going to cause everyone's doom in the next 3 years. Both of those seem unrealistic. Both seem super fun to talk about, and super fun for getting attention. And so I think in these things, it tends to be that boring middle ground. But we're humans, and we like the controversial. So it makes sense we
No,
gravitate there.
absolutely. I totally agree with you. What you just nailed there, in my opinion, is something that's really important to talk about. Like, we have so much in the world right now that's going for AI, and I feel like there's a lot of over-indexing going. Right, there's a lot of over-indexing on the freaking out. I'm sure you've seen recently all of the freakouts about like, oh, this today, Claude's a couple of people in Claude, the company, the higher ups, left and are like going to the middle of the UK to like have some getaway and journal for the rest of their life or something because they're freaked. It was this top security guy or something, and I was like, can't wait for Twitter to run away with this. And there's that. And then you also have the other people that are like, I bought $20,000 worth of Mac Studios, and this is going to be my employees
Yeah,
forever now. All right. We have the same thing within 24 hours occurring on my feed. And I'm like, I'm getting an aneurysm. Because it's just like so whiplashy. Where do you kind of stand on the job market and how it's going to be affected, let's say, in the next 3 to 5 years?
yeah. I I put myself again back into like the mid '90s as like the best analog I can find, and like I remember when word processing was new and how incredibly scary that was to people of what would that mean. And PowerPoint was like the new cool thing of what we would use. And you had Adobe Photoshop. And what if people didn't have to take photos on film anymore, and they could edit them in a digital manner, right? Like it was all the same sort of thing of this this thinking that it was going to completely change the workforce and eliminate a whole bunch of jobs. And I think the truth is it does completely change the workforce, and it completely changes those roles. But historically, what it does is it creates a whole bunch of new jobs, and generally higher earning jobs than what historically existed there, right? Like you don't look at digital photo production and say those jobs for the last 20 years have been terrible jobs to have. Like they can be fantastically rewarding, well-paid jobs, and they can exist everywhere from independent designers to people working at Fortune 500 companies, right? So when I look at AI, it feels the same of if I was in the 90s and had been older and I could only use a typewriter and I never learned how to use Microsoft Word, that was probably really, really bad for my career, and that would not be an enjoyable thing to go through. On the flip side, if I learned how to use a computer and, the basic Microsoft suite, I probably was, early in the 90s and able to get a whole bunch of jobs because I was viewed as tech forward. AI feels very much the same in that if people are resistant to the new tools or don't embrace learning how to use them, very quickly their productivity will go down. To your point of Cloud Code before, if you're a software engineer and you haven't learned how to use these tools, your productivity will be less than your peers, and it's going to get harder and harder to find a role. On the flip side is if you engage with the tools now and you learn how to use them and you use them effectively, that can be a superpower, and you can become even more in demand than you were before. So I think it's really how we use the tools than that the tools have power over us. And we had a blog post on our site, I don't know, a month ago or so, and one of my co-founders, Sev, wrote a piece about how we think about building products with AI now, and sort of the mix of like vibe coding doesn't work for enterprise grade products, particularly a company like us that's building enterprise grade infrastructure. But at the same time, the idea that you wouldn't use augmented tools at all just seems incredibly slow and unrealistic in this day and age. And so it's really about where are the tools the most effective, and then where does the human add the most value, and putting those pieces together. And within that, I think that's where you get the most leverage. But the key is everything's going to continue to evolve every month to month or year to year. And so I wouldn't rest on one's laurels of where you think the right place to lean into is today. And probably it's over the next few years you're going to rewrite that sort of guidance, on an annual basis.
How do you like test things out then, like on your end? How do you, go about, there's just so many different things, right? Like how do you go about testing every new opportunity and whatnot? Because I feel like there's so many different ways that you can go right now with all the different tools that are out there. On a personal basis, you got people using Cursor and stuff as their like machine of, or it's like a workhorse of choice. And then you have people who are using like Claude Cowork now. How do you kind of test it out and not waste your entire day playing around?
Yeah, so I really think that's where human community comes into value. So, like, what we do is we encourage everyone in the company to use the various tools. Doesn't matter if you're in marketing or engineering or sales, um, and then to use them within our own company workflows as well, and to share that across the staff. And then the same is done within peer groups, whether it's regional meetups or whether it's in online communities. But talking to friends about how they're using and what use cases and what can you learn from that. And I think it's sort of that shared learning that makes us progress quicker. But I don't think there's an answer I give today that gets you to the answer 6 months from now. Because to your examples, the tools that are offered will be drastically different 6 months from now. And so I
Yeah.
think it's actually more about how do you create that learning pipeline that gives you signal to when there is a new, more effective tool that you're able to use. And I think part of it's that because that cycle of tool development has moved so quick, on the product side for the companies, they figured out that they need to make sure user onboarding is extremely simple and streamlined to remove switching costs. And so I think that's been really good for users of various AI tools, regardless of what function you're within, um, and basically ensures that like the old like have a growth mindset people talked about is like a very literal thing right now of you need to be able to learn new tool sets on a monthly basis to be able to keep up with the speed of productivity that people are pumping out there right now.
Do you think in the long term with this CS is going to kind of go away, that degree and the field people are trying to get into in the first place?
I don't think so. I
Okay.
I, I
Sure.
think it just changes. Yeah, no, I remember when I was starting my first company, I ran it through high school, and then university, and I looked at a CS degree as, like, not needed because it felt it was behind, what we were figuring out in our parents' basements when I was a kid sort of thing. That is clearly wrong. We're talking now 30 years later about CS degrees still, right? So, I think what it covers, what the technical information is, how it's applied, that may change, but, like, we're well over 30 years into the idea of should you just drop out of university or skip it completely and start a company versus should you get a CS degree. And I think lots of founders have said, I'll skip the university stage and start building. And then I think they go and they hire a bunch of people that graduate from university for their technical capabilities. And so don't view them as mutually exclusive. I view them as just different ways that people learn. Some people learn best on their own asynchronously, and other people want to go to school and teach their own.
Yeah, tell me a little bit more about that statement you just made, because I actually totally agree about the async versus in person thing. What kind of drives you as a founder to be self learning, self teaching, and all the like?
Yeah, I would say from my personality wise, and it's probably partly why I'm a founder, is I don't do well with rigid structure. So I don't do well sitting in a class. Like I went to university for a bit and I skipped most of my classes, and I could get good marks going to exams without going to classes. And eventually I said, like, this isn't doing anything for me in terms of starting a business. So why would I keep doing this? And so naturally, I think that's also why I found companies is I like to find problems and go and solve them as opposed to be employed by someone else to tell me the little bit of the problem I get to work on within their structure. But I think that's a personality thing. Like I think some people like rightly may have a view of I want to go to somewhere like University of Waterloo or Stanford and learn from the brightest minds
Really
in the
be
world.
taught.
And
Yeah.
I love that structure environment for 4 years, and I will have amazing superpowers that come out of that. And I like working on a very specific capability set or function within a company, and I'm going to own that specific thing. And I'm part of a rowing team, for lack of better words. I'm going row my oar, and we're going to move faster together. I I think in any company building, you want both of those personalities, right? Like they're complementary personalities, and I think trying to make any one person try and be both of them or be the one that they are naturally usually leads to bad outcomes. And so in my experience, like the way I like to think about whether it's my own performance or managing folks is like, what are you great at, and how can we help you triple down on that thing? And where do you have gaps or you're weak at or whatever phraseology we want to use that day? And how do we hire other people to support you there? Because like the odds are you can be 3 times better at the thing you're great at. The odds that you're suddenly going to become great at the thing you're weak at are super low. And we shouldn't penalize for that, nor should we focus your time and energy on that thing.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think college for me was one of the situations where I kind of did it because, well, I did it because it was something I ran track in college, so I think I was going to probably be an athlete no matter what. But the outside of that context, it was like really, like, do I need to be here for a lot of it? Because I felt like I go about saying it, and maybe a lot of it's on me, but I say pretty often, I was like, I don't think I learned insert word here in college, like about a lot of things, right? And I have an MBA, and people like if anyone asks me like, should I get my MBA? I'm like, nope. Not
Yeah.
saying that
Well,
it's universal advice, but I'm saying if you're like me, nope.
yeah, well, and I think it's also like, what's the point of it on your path, right? So for some people, it's I need to get a very specific degree if I want to be a doctor. There are very literal degrees
You
I
do
need to
need to
get to
do it.
become a doctor. There's no way around it, no matter what your learning style is. And there's other ones where you don't. But like I think to your point, I did a exec ed thing during COVID for 4 months, and what the prof said, the college said to us, they said like you will remember 2 things from this 4-month period. So decide what those 2 things are, but you're gonna forget all the other case studies we've done and all the other information we teach you, and that's just the nature of what this is. You're not actually going to retain all the info. And so I think that's true for a lot of people is they're going through the motions of it's the natural thing you do post high school. And sometimes it's the natural thing you need to do to get into the career of your choosing. And I think that's very much dependent upon the function you do. I think the place I was lucky is if you're a founder, what you need to do is you need to get a company moving forward and get some momentum. And fortunately, that doesn't require a university degree.
I totally agree. And you think right now, I guess from your perspective, how are you kind of approaching hiring for maybe not? Don't we don't have to get too detailed, but how was the new improvements in AI approached how you're doing hiring?
Yeah, so it's interesting. Like largely we look at it in terms of how the applicants uh, look at the application process. So for us, what what we first started seeing when we started the company was people were clearly using like I don't know what people refer to as cheating tools or support tools that are AI enabled during the interview, and we're like, oh, this is interesting. Like, is this a good thing or a bad thing? Because we want people using AI tools, we want them being innovative, and if they're able to use that to augment their interview process, is that applicable to their job? Because if are on the third round of interviews and you're using AI tools to try and augment or cheat your coding capabilities when we're hiring you, well, can you use that to produce a good product when you work for us? And if you can, like, is that not a benefit for us? And so what we actually started moving into is as we take people through the interview process, what we're asking them is, what AI tools are you using to support you in these case studies we provide as part of the interview process? How would you use those when you're actually hired in your day to day work? And similar to what you were asking me before, how has that evolved over the last 12 months? And so we try and incorporate as a key piece of the conversation in the hiring process, because our view at this time is if someone isn't fluent in the tools and doesn't have sort of pointy answers in that regard, they're probably the wrong fit for us because they're probably not going to have the productivity we're going to look for and be able to keep up with the team.
I really like what you
And,
just
and
said
so
there.
it's been an interesting
I,
play.
I like this frame of mind because I do think there's a fair amount of struggle that maybe some business owners will have if they don't if they see people kind of taking that step forward and they're not necessarily you said cheating, and I find it entertaining because for me, I'd be like, "Wow, man, this person just knows how to get stuff done. I don't care. I don't care if they, like I think there's levels to that. Like, I think when people like are pretending they've done stuff before, like a resume or whatever, that's one
That's
thing. But
misrepresenting, but that's why I guess we've said like the easy way to solve for it is say, we want you to use AI tools because we expect you to do that at your job. So tell us which ones you're using during the interview process. And now it's not like this trust misleading issue. It's an issue of tell us what tools you're using and we'll give you a high five if that made you do it faster. Again, if I take you back to like the early days of Microsoft Word, if someone was submitting a resume, it had no spelling errors and you found out that they use spell check, like in 1995, that was like, oh, could you spell yourself? Nowadays, they'd be like, you are a complete moron if you don't use spell check before you submit something or Grammarly or whatever the thing of the day is, right? And so the same with AI tools, like it shouldn't be, oh God, you're using a tool to try and pass this coding test we have for you. It should be, tell me about the tool, tell me why you select it, and tell me how much faster it allowed you to do the coding test and why this is the right answer. Because really, what I care about when we hire you is how you do tool selection and where human in the loop you believe should be in the process. I I am wrong if my answer is how dare you use a tool, and frankly, you're the wrong person for me to hire if you haven't thought to use a tool. Um, so yeah, we found it super productive as we've been hiring people, and it, I'll use like Sev had a great example in our first billion hour management portal. So one person on our team is absolutely fantastic. Dylan built out the first version of our management portal took him under 2 weeks to do, and several of my co-founders' comments was like, when he tried to do the large enterprise a decade ago, it took 20 people in 6 months, right? And if you didn't have all these tools to support and someone that knew how to use them, one, you couldn't produce the tool, but two, to your point of the vibe coding stuff, be able to produce the tool to a point that like you can present it in an enterprise environment. And that isn't something you can do by just any person going on vibe coding. Like you have to have a human in the loop piece that's able to ensure the output of code's been quality checked and refined to meet those sort of requirements.
what do you think is the so obviously we talked about like how people can utilize different tools, but and I think that's a great approach when hiring. What do you think then is where AI agents sit there and your workforce?
Yeah, so agents, like I find interesting where we find a lot of value for them is what I would call used to be called workflow automation, right? And so I think my debate with agents right now, where I don't have conviction around them, is I do have conviction they automate workflows and they do it more efficiently than some of the historical tools, which is fantastic. And they can have hooks into a bunch of different applications and databases to be able to push out um, information more effectively. Where I don't see agents at this point in time in terms of real world environments is where they are truly replacing or replacing human roles. So like if I take like a basic example, like if I think of a finance department with a bunch of analysts, so my old life we had the corporate M&A team. I could see how that team doesn't require 10 people anymore. It now requires one, and they are augmented by agentic tools to be able to create more outputs more effectively and a lot more efficiently. I do not see agents at the place where that team is an agent. And that seems to be the gap for me in terms of where agents are expected to be able to go. And I don't have a clear line of sight to when that actually changes. And the answer may be it's not going to. The truth is you need the human in the loop, and it's more about how do you get more productivity out of an individual human. as opposed to an agent truly changes, replaces someone. So it feels like agents are effectively replacing workflow, white collar work, but they're not replacing the team around that workflow work. And I think that's the unlock I'm super curious to see happen. But curious, have you thought, like, have you come across anywhere where someone says it's not that we replace this role, but that team that had a leader, that entire team is now replaced, including the leader, by the agentic capability.
I don't think so. No, I don't think I've necessarily seen that. And I think it's an astute point. Work removed does not necessitate role removed, right?
Yeah, because
I don't think it's yeah, it's not mutually exclusive, but I think it's a presumption people will often make, like, as a byproduct of it. Yeah.
if you think of the finance example and you take it back to historical, like a whole bunch of roles were removed when we went from paper to Excel spreadsheets because things could be done more efficiently with more efficient computation, right? So then if you move finance agents to doing that a hell of a lot more efficiently, that removes a number of people problem, but you still need the human in the loop leader on it. Like there's still a key piece there. Um, but it feels like it should be something solvable. Like it feels like the technology is moving in that direction. I Where I struggle is, does that remove the human in the loop, or do the humans just become superhumans and do litany of more? And when I look at the history over the last 400 years, my feeling is humans just be able to do a whole bunch more stuff, as opposed to you don't have the human in the loop there. And I think the positive way of playing that maybe is like the humans are able to get value out of the AI. Like the goal is not to replace the human in the loop. The goal is for the agents to make the human more powerful and more capable.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a good point. I think that's a very astute observation. I think it's a good way to frame it. I kind of do struggle with this idea that the I know you mentioned it earlier. And it's funny you said this because we always talk about it in the show. There's three categories that people fall into: AI Armageddon. It'll make a bunch of solopreneurs, or it will make everyone's jobs more knowledge worky, and they'll have to do less click like BS. Um, and then there's a lot of people who fall into a mixture of two and three, where it seems like you're kind of in number three and probably two to some extent, just because your background as well. Like there'll be more probably small size company entrepreneurs like yourself who care about very AI focused employees. So yeah, I don't know. Where do you kind of fall into those three takes?
Yeah, I guess take one to me, like the true doomsday scenarios, I would say are above my technical capacity, but I would say I am not convinced that they are impending pieces. Like this is a tool, and like many tools we have, tools can be used for bad things, tools can be used for good things, and we need to be thoughtful about that. I think in terms of two and three, it removes the click clackety things, but the point is like the click clacky things remove the pencil and paper things. And so like that is still a massive shift to be able to do in terms of one's own productivity and the things we can create for the world. So I don't want to underplay that. I think they are, if you go back to like using human labor to using machines to using pencils to using click clackety computers to using agents to drive things forward, like those are amazing, impressive changes. And if we're talking about, the state of where agents are today, and we're talking 3.5 years after ChatGPT's launch, like where will be 20 years from now, right? So like again, I center myself in like, what was the cool thing we were talking about in 1995? And like probably very few people can even remember what that was today, right? Because it seems so minuscule and unimportant compared to where technology has gotten. And so you have to think the same is going to be the newest, coolest thing that we're all playing with, from a tool set capability in 2026 is going to be forgotten by 2035, let alone 2050.
Oh, totally. I agree. What is your personal favorite? Last question. What is your personal favorite tool that you use in order to get more work done? That's an AI tool.
Yeah, I'll be honest, like it's the simple things that make me most excited. And so I'd say it's tools like Granola, and there's another great one called Fellow.ai, But that having sort of that assistant or chief of staff sort of role able to support in my role makes me incredibly more productive and has been incredibly helpful. And so I think it's an example where I'm a big fan of the less layers in companies, the better to drive productivity. And so if I'm able to get a huge amount of support that makes me incredibly more productive, it simplifies what the company is, which makes a company overall more productive. And so it's like one of those basic use cases that's been around for several years now, but I found super helpful, and like I think it's one of the ones everyone knows because it actually has mass user adoption and works incredibly well.
What is your if you had to pick, this is a new question I'm gonna start asking people. In the long term, who wins, OpenAI or Anthropic?
Mm, that's a good one. I that's a good one. In the long term, who wins? I'm going to go with I think open source wins. I'll reject the option between the two. I think open source has a huge advantage. I think we see outside of North America open source scaling incredibly rapidly for incredibly cheaply off the back of all the money being spent on the proprietary layers. And like from a startup perspective, startups have a huge competitive advantage because they have to operate with lower resources, have to make hard decisions as a result in prioritization. Open source is kind of that way. I think when you are able to create large communities that drive adoption, drive feedback, and drive improvement, and you can scale off the back of what the proprietary code bases are doing. I think that's a huge power. So I'm curious. We'll find out in 20 years what was right, what was wrong, and always in these things, my guess is there's a fifth option we haven't heard about yet, right? Like you can go back to my 1997 equivalents, and no one's talking about Google. So we'll see what's the company that gets founded in
Well, that
2027
was
that
because they
makes your
fired
question
Steve in
completely
the first place.
irrelevant.
That was because they fired Steve in the first place. All right, that's because, and then he came back and they're irrelevant again. But that's besides the point. Rest in peace to the worst decision making, the worst decision by a board in business history. Sorry, continue.
Yeah, so I think that's sort of how I think about. But I worry less about who are the two big name brands today and who's going to win in 20 years because my guess is it's a third option that we're not actually talking about.
Totally. Well, I want to just end things off by saying really fun conversation about AI with you today. Everyone, please make sure to go check out everything that Rade is doing at PolarGrid. So it's spelled POLAR grid.ai. That's polargrid.ai. If you have anywhere else that you'd like people to check you out, please let them know.
Awesome. You can follow me on X, check me out on LinkedIn, and same with PolarGrid on both. And thanks so much for taking the time to chat today, Dimitri. Really enjoyed it.
Absolutely. I really appreciate it from you as well. And thank you so much for being here. And also thank you so much for everyone who listened to this episode or liked and watched it. You know, there's so many ways to watch it. I don't even know. This could be a damn clip. So please make sure to check out all of our stuff across all the platforms, but also make sure to leave us a review on Apple Podcasts. That would help the most. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.